Well, hey folks, that's a little bit of Milwaukee Blues played in what I would call an old-timey three-finger picking style. And what this video is about is to sort of address the question of what exactly is old-timey three-finger picking. I'm mostly a clawhammer and two-finger style picker, but I play some three-finger style too, and I've got several videos up on YouTube where I play in an old-timey three-finger picking style. And several people have asked me, what's the difference between that and bluegrass? What distinguishes old-timey? Why would you call something old-timey rather than bluegrass? So I thought I'd make this video that shares my thoughts on what are the distinguishing features of old-timey three-finger picking. And you know, there's no exact definition here. Let me start by giving you that caveat. And these are just my thoughts. I think a lot of other people who play old-timey three-finger picking would agree in general with what I'm saying here, but I'm sure other people have other thoughts about this as well. Point number one, there's a big gray area between what we would call old-timey or old-time three-finger picking and bluegrass three-finger picking. And if we kind of think of Scruggs style as the standard of three-finger picking, although there's single note Reno style, there's melodic style. Is that bluegrass or is that melodic three-finger, whatever? We won't get lost in that for now. But the point is, there's not an exact boundary here between bluegrass and old time when it comes to three-finger picking. The one thing they have in common is a thumb and two fingers are used to play the banjo. Beyond that, there's a lot of different variations. I think of someone like the source player George Pegram from North Carolina, who was a three-finger picker. He wore picks. He mostly played resonator banjos, but he'd play whatever banjo somebody handed to him. And you could ask the question, was he bluegrass or was he old time? He wasn't a Scruggs style player, but he had a hard driving style. He played fast. Art Rosenbaum described his playing as hell-bent for leather. Some people might say, oh, that's very bluegrassy. And some people say, no, I think that's kind of old-timey. Nobody's wrong, nobody's right on that. It's a matter of opinion. It's a matter of sensibility. But he certainly wasn't a Scruggs picker per se. He used a lot of square rolls, didn't use a lot of forward rolls. But that's one example that comes to mind is George Pegram, a well-known picker from the 50s and the 60s. So it's a big gray area. The second thing I would say is there's no singular old-time three-finger style. There are old-time three-finger styles. Uncle Dave Macon, Doc Boggs, Charlie Poole, George Pegram again, were all three-finger pickers. And if you listen to recordings of those four people, there's not a whole lot in common between their playing other than the fact that they use three fingers. Doc Boggs is very different than George Pegram. Charlie Poole is very different than George Pegram. They had different ways of using their thumb and two fingers to play the banjo. Really, most old-time three-finger picking styles are very individualistic. Some people, especially modern players, might incorporate elements of Scruggs style or even Reno style or even Keith melodic style into their old-time finger playing. Again, no sharp boundaries, and there's lots of different styles that fall under the category of old-time three-finger picking. Number three, the type of banjos used. You know, in bluegrass, it's almost exclusively a resonator banjo. In old-timey three-finger picking, you'll see people playing on open backs, you'll see people playing on resonators. It's all over the place. There's no standard banjo for playing in old-timey three-finger style. The use of picks, very individualistic. Again, bluegrass is almost entirely the use of finger picks. It's played in ensembles, on the stage. You need lots of volume, you need lots of speed. finger picks are pretty critical for that. Old-timey banjo. I don't use finger picks when I'm playing by myself, but I also play in an old-time jam trio. I'm on banjo, a couple of friends are on fiddle and guitar, and I always wear finger picks when I play with them. It just works out better. George Pigram wore finger picks. I don't think Dave Macon did. Doc Boggs didn't wear finger picks. By the way, I've got my old minstrel banjo, my old Boucher replica sitting there. I've even played three-finger picking on that old fretless there. So I wouldn't call that bluegrass, but it's definitely three-finger picking. To use picks or not use picks is, again, very individualistic, just like the choice of banjo. Another critical thing is, if we think about Scruggs styles, there's definitely a lot of signature licks to Scruggs style. The Foggy Mountain lick, the standard G lick at the end of tunes, the Cripple Creek slide, so on and so forth. And you hear these over and over and over and over again in Scruggs style. They're very much standard to the style. Old-timey finger picking is less about licks. It's much more straightforward. It doesn't have the frills and the fancies. And you still hear slides and hammers and pulls and all that. But the signature licks of bluegrass are not used as extensively, if at all. You'll hear some modern players who are also bluegrass three-finger pickers insert some Scruggs type licks into their old-timey three-finger picking. But in general, it's a little less ornate, a little less fancy than in bluegrass picking. I insert them on occasion, I experiment with them, but I try not to overdo it. It doesn't fit with old-timey music, if you will, quite as well. Another aspect to think about is syncopation. You know, because of the use of forward rolls and bluegrass, you get a lot of displaced melody notes and a lot of resulting syncopation where the accents fall and all that sort of thing. Old-timey three-finger picking is a little more, if you want to use a phrase, a little more linear. I do use forward rolls a lot in my three-finger old-time picking, but I try not to displace melody notes too much. I try to kind of keep those notes in their lane, if you will. And there are bluegrass pickers that are like that too. So again, there's that gray area. But you'll hear some bluegrass pickers that really syncopate and displace those melody notes, even though they're still there. Less so in general in old-timey finger picking. Rolls are used extensively throughout three-finger old-time picking, just like in bluegrass, just like in Scruggs style. The square roll, or the inside-outside roll, whatever you want to call it, is used fairly extensively. Someone like George Pegram relied on that as his go-to roll. And of course, the square roll is a standard roll in bluegrass as well, but you'll hear it a lot amongst old-time three-finger pickers. The forward roll, that's really a Scruggs invention, and that's really what gives his style, besides all the licks, its signature sound. Again, you'll hear some old-time three-finger pickers use forward rolls or shorten forward rolls, and some not. And same thing with reverse rolls and Dillard rolls and forward reverse rolls. I insert all those into my three-finger picking, but I don't go quite as wild with it. I'll put a lot of breaks, I'll put a lot of pinches in there. Again, a little more linear compared to bluegrass. Things like pinches get used a lot in three-finger picking, just like in bluegrass. Pinches are very useful. But one thing you'll hear with a lot of old-time three-finger pickers that you don't hear with bluegrass as much is use of brushes. Just like in a claw hammer or up picking, you might hear brushes thrown in there. You know, Earl Scruggs would throw a brush in there every now and then, a big strum really more than a brush. You'll hear old-time pickers throw brushes into their playing quite frequently. Some don't at all. Some are a little closer to Scruggs style, but it's not uncommon to hear brushes in old-time three-finger picking, just like you would hear in claw hammer or up picking. Tunings, probably the last thing I want to mention here. Bluegrassers pretty much stick with the standard G tuning. Every now and then they might go to the D tuning or the drop C or standard C tuning. But, you can get by with the G tuning for the most part and use closed chord forms or capo and go up and down. That can play in just any key you want. Old-time three-finger pickers tend to use a lot of the same tunings that claw hammer and two-finger pickers use. So in addition to standard G, you might hear use of the sawmill G tuning for modal tunes. You might hear a lot of double C or double D, double C capoed up in other tunings. Dot Boggs used all sorts of strange tunings. Charlie Poole exclusively used the standard C tuning and just kind of worked up and down the neck with that, different chord forms. So tunings are all over the place in old-time three-finger picking, whereas not so much in bluegrass. You know, I think of Tony Ellis, a great bluegrass player, but he also has created a lot of lovely original compositions that you could call traditional arrangements, traditional melodies, traditional tunes, and he does it all in the double C tuning while three-finger picking. Is that bluegrass? Is that old time? What is it? Is it just Tony Ellis? You call it Ellis style? So he loves the double C tuning. You know, you could argue all day long whether that particular picking is old time or bluegrass. Maybe it's some of both. It's pure Tony Ellis, that's for sure, and it's beautiful. So anyway, there's some thoughts on all this. You know, gray areas, but you can look at different aspects of the playing, the use of picks, the type of banjos, the syncopation, the use of rolls, pinches, brushes, the use of different tunings, and you can make some comparisons and draw some general distinctions there. And like I said, three-finger old-time styles are very individualistic. I developed mine by just listening to a lot of different pickers and kind of going my own way. And it's still evolving, it's still changing. You know, just like people play bluegrass, they learn, they develop their skills, they add new licks to their lick library, a new roll pattern, so on and so forth. It's ever evolving. So no different there. So it's not a single style. There's not a precise boundary between bluegrass and old time, but a lot of times you kind of know it when you hear it or you think you know it. There's my thoughts. If you've got thoughts on this or questions, post them in the comments. You know, this is open discussion here, but hopefully this answered some of the questions out there, or at least started to get you thinking about what some of the differences and similarities are between old-time three-finger picking and bluegrass three-finger picking. There you have it, my thoughts for the day. Have fun, and all is just keep on picking.